Harpreet, what the hell's up?
Hey, Joe, man, how's it going? Good to be
Good.
here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So the Data Nerd Herd, we got Harpreet Sahota. Awesome, man. Glad to have you on. So,
Man, it's an absolute pleasure, man. It's cool because like I've been hanging out with you every Friday for the last several months, right? Just
mhm.
hanging out for the Arts of Data Science happy hour. Uh, but I've never like had like a one-on-one actual conversation with you. So this will be cool. Get to know each other uh while simultaneously everybody else listens in. That's cool, man.
Yeah, it should be fun. So cool. I mean, for people who may not know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro about what you're up to and what you're about?
Yeah, man. I guess I mean obviously I'm a data scientist, which is probably the least exciting or interesting thing about me, right? Like I work full time as a data scientist at this manufacturing organization called Price Industries. I was the first data scientist they hired, so I'm in charge of kind of building up the data science practice.
Mm.
But outside of that, like you know, I said that data science is like the least interested thing about me, but I think it's the only thing about me because there's the Artist of Data Science podcast, which I'm the host of, and that's been going on for just over a year now. And then I'm also principal mentor at Data Science Dream Job. So I joined Data Science Dream Job as a student myself back in like 2018,
Nice.
and since then just been kind of rising up the ranks there. Now I'm principal mentor there.
Nice. It's quite the accomplishment.
Yeah, man, it's been cool.
Yeah, your brand. I mean, it seems it's nothing but data science, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of layers to that, though. There's what the data
Yeah,
science you do for your day job, the data scientist that you are maybe when you're Clark Kenting it, I suppose, right? And so
yeah.
there's a lot of facets to it too.
Hold on, man. Let me get Clark Kent going on right now. There we go.
Oh shit, no,
That was official.
yeah, now we
Yeah.
do look like a nerd herd. It's great. So that's awesome. I mean, how did you get into data in the first place? I mean, you're a smart enough guy. How did you end up in a field like this?
Yeah, man. I mean, shit, man. How far back you want to go? So, we, I kind of always been good with math. Always been fascinated with it. I was never like a good student. Um, and I graduated during an unfortunate time with my first undergrad. It was 2007, 2008 when the economy had just like went to shit and I couldn't get a job anywhere. Most likely couldn't get a job because my GPA was horrible.
Mm.
So I started teaching math at this place called Options for Youth, which was and still is a place for academic recovery. And I taught math there to students that were really struggling in school. And just through that process of teaching math, like I realized, oh man, like I actually really enjoy this stuff.
Hmm.
I wonder how I can really get paid to do this, right? And this is back in 2007, 2008, right? And at that time, the hottest job was an actuary.
Oh,
Yeah.
yep,
So I was like,
remember
all right,
that.
cool. I'm gonna be that thing. You guys get paid money and do a bunch of math. That sounds interesting to me. So then I said, all right, cool. I'm going to go to grad school, become an actuary, do whatever I got to do to get, be an actuary. Totally confused. There wasn't many resources to guide me along the way. And just went back to school for like, essentially making up my horrible grades for my first undergrad. Went back to school at UC Davis and took a bunch of classes there. And eventually applied to grad school, got in there. And my plan was to become an actuary. And specifically within actuarial sciences, I was really interested in like predictive modeling
Mm,
and things like that. So I took a bunch of actuarial exams, had a job as an actuary for a while.
cool.
Then I fell in love with a girl who happened to be based out of Winnipeg. So I moved here because she's already well established, has her career as a doctor here. She's an optometrist. Um,
Cool.
and I was sidetracked for a while. And I was a biostatistician for several years. And once I got like my permanent residency, that gave me the authorization to work in any company in Canada whatsoever. I said, all right, cool, let's go back to this predictive modeling thing. And I guess it was somehow in the 5 years that I'd been away from the space, it was rebranded as data science. And yeah, I was like, all right, cool, be a data scientist is getting back in touch with my roots. So that was a really long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how I got here.
Yeah, I mean, how did you feel about the jump from being an actuary to a data scientist, though?
there's a lot more software engineering for sure, a lot more coding involved. Like when I was an actuary, I used a lot of SAS,
Hmm.
a lot of R. I did VBA and macros and stuff like that. So I kind of had like that programming mindset, but I never wrote software before. So that was the biggest hurdle for me coming into data science, was kind of learning how to become a better coder, become a better programmer, like actually write software that is somewhat production ready.
Right. What did you pick a particular language to start out with? Like a data sciencey language?
Yeah, so this was back in 2017 when I picked up Python. I was talking to a friend of mine in Chicago, and he was like, "Oh man, you gotta learn Python R. Nobody's using R anymore for anything." And I was like, "Okay, great." He's like, "SAS, dude, you can't like deploy anything in SAS." And I was like, "What the fuck does deploy mean, man? Like, I have no clue." And he put me up on Python, and I started learning that in 2017.
Interesting.
Yeah,
That's cool. What did you think about learning Python? How did that go for you?
dude, it was so weird to me. Like, I just like because in SAS everything's got like you've got an ID column, and the ID column actually means something, and then in Python you got indexes, and for a data frame I'm talking about, and just the data structures. Like I was used to working with none but flat files
Hmm.
in SAS and in R. Then there's all this weird JSON blob stuff and XML, HTML data sources. Like having to manipulate and work with those. It was challenging, man. But it was fun. Uh, I just enjoyed learning it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's a cool language. I started a Python meetup years ago. Seems like a lifetime ago now. We're actually having one right after our call, but um, it's interesting. It seems, 'cause so I've seen people learning Python over the years. This must have been 2013, I think we kicked this off. So, and each generation, I would say, of somebody learning Python, it either clicks or it doesn't, right? But it seems like very accessible if you come from a mindset where you're very logical and structured in your thinking. I think programming in general is hard to learn if you're not that way. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
It's definitely a mindset, man. You have to be able to think clearly about, okay, here is the thing that I'm putting in. There's going to be
Mhm.
some stuff that I do to it, and I want it to look like this when it comes out. And so typically, you know what it looks like I'm just talking about data, right?
Yeah.
You know what the data looks like when you first get it. And then maybe you got to like, this is what I did at least. I would draw out what I wanted the data to look like afterwards,
Cool.
right? Like I wanted these columns, I wanted the table thing. Great. Now I got to figure out how to make this happen. Um, it's a lot of stumbling and stack overflowing and things like that. But you just keep doing it over and over and over, right? Through repetition, through practice, it just becomes easier. And that's, as long as you can think clearly and don't get in your way while you're learning, it's easy.
Yeah. I mean, I think the hardest part is getting in your way, though, right?
Oh, dude, so
It
hard,
always
man.
happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So getting in your own way. So yeah, but yeah, that's the, I still do that every day, man. It's hard.
Same.
Hard to get out of my way.
Do you,
Own
do, you-
way.
do- are you the kind of guy that overthinks a lot of things? Or you think really hard about something?
Uh yeah, at times.
Okay.
Um, like I mean, I don't overanalyze anything. I might overthink something in the sense that I might think about what the outcome may
Hmm.
be, like the 100 different outcomes that something could have, because like it features a probability distribution, right? And I'd
Yeah.
obviously want to increase my chances of success with anything that I do. So I try to think about all the things that can go wrong, and then try to take action now that will minimize probability of things going wrong.
I like that probabilistic thinking too. I mean, I definitely tell you, I've had actuarial training. So,
I mean, dude, this is one of the things I do like every morning is just one probability riddle out of here. Like I
no
probability
way. That's
Yep.
cool.
Probability theory is my absolute favorite part of data science.
That's rad. I mean, the cool thing with probability is it's been around for a long, long time, and I
Yeah.
still find it's an underappreciated skill even in modern data science today. What if you were to describe like today's data science curriculum? What would you think it is?
So I'm always like enrolling in Udemy courses and in boot camps and stuff just to see what's out there. And it's just an overemphasis, I think, on machine learning,
Mm,
right? There's just a huge overemphasis on that because data science is not like a discrete skill, right? Like I can't point to one thing and say, "Yep, I know data
right.
science now," right? It's really a combination of skills, right? There's you got to know probability, statistics, coding, obviously data structures, algorithms, but you also need to know about like communication. You need to know some microeconomics and business concepts and things like that. So I think a lot of data science curriculum to me feels really heavy on very myopic, I guess, is if I could use that word, on just the quantitative aspects of the field, heavily biased towards machine learning.
Mhm. It seems to be. I do agree with this assessment. Um, I find it interesting where the trajectory of, I guess, data science curriculum has gone. Like I remember back in 2011, I signed up for Andrew Ng's first machine learning course. It was in Octave, I think it was. No idea what that was. Like kind of a crappy version of MATLAB, I guess, or Mathematica. So, but at that time, I think 100,000 students had signed up for that same class, and that blew the MOOC thing like wide open. This is 2011, 2010, one of the two. It was like nothing much was going on, and I mean, I'd been interested in machine learning for quite a while, so I was like, this seems cool. Let's see
Mm.
what this is about. But even then, the fundamentals that he was teaching was very, it was a good mix of like math and programming and just outcomes. And I think since his course kicked off, I would say the modern data science, education, you're absolutely right. It skews very heavy towards machine learning, but I think at a loss of appreciation for the underlying like math, for example, or the mechanics of how this kind of stuff works. So
Just even clear thinking, clearly
yeah,
thinking
that's a good
a
point.
problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I find that's one thing that I see lacking a lot. Like I review a lot of projects, whether it's for mentees or just kind of just scraping the internet, just seeing interesting
Mm,
projects that people are doing, and there's just a lot of unclear thinking, right? They just do everything they can possibly do and it gets muddled. I can't find the message they're trying to communicate, and it's very rare to find a really well thought out, well structured project that showcases somebody's ability
interesting.
to work.
What are some of the thinking skills that you would want to see in a data scientist if you were to start from scratch and design, Harpreet's uh, data science curriculum?
I guess I'd focus on fundamentals for sure. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
so which question am I answering here? Is the question that I'm answering if I was to design my own data science curriculum, what would it entail, or what what critical thinking skills?
Let's start with the critical thinking skills, and then move into the curriculum.
Yeah, I think from critical thinking standpoint, just logic, I think would be a
Mm,
good one. Just not even super in depth with like formal logic or anything like that, but just basics of arguments, right?
interesting.
How to you know like induction, like what is induction, what are the problems with induction, why, when do you choose deduction over induction, what's mathematical induction versus regular induction, like some of the like obviously I've been reading how to solve it, but
Yeah,
yeah, thinking about that. um but yeah, so I think in terms of critical thinking, just the ability to first think clearly from a set of premises to its conclusion to see if those tie together make sense to form a solid argument. And then also just being able to ask good questions, right? Being able
mm,
to really clarify a problem statement so that you know what it is that you're actually trying to do. So those two skills, I guess, would be up there.
do you find that data scientists lack these types of skills, like even as simple as knowing when to use induction or deduction to analyze a
Probably not
situation?
when they're yeah, probably not when they're first starting out. I think when they're first starting out, the thing most people that I've observed care about is just teach me all the technical skills, as if just
Mm.
knowing rattling off the names of 100 different algorithms is what makes one a data scientist, right?
I thought
Uh,
that's what it was.
no, yeah, being able to solve. I mean, I guess to a certain extent, I can understand why
Yeah.
there is a heavy, leaning towards HackerRank and Leak Code type of problems, because they do force you to think clearly through something. So I'm a big proponent of having those type of assessments to weed out candidates, but you get that phenomenon of people studying to the test. You know what I mean? Instead of understanding the principles and then from the principles moving to techniques, just memorizing answers and rote memorization of steps and trying to distill everything down to just uh, some type of prescriptive series of steps, and not being able to see the whole problem and how things kind of fit together.
Right. Makes sense. So say that you've taught somebody how to critically think, then like what would come next in teaching somebody to be a data scientist?
Probabilistic thinking for sure, man. Probabilistic thinking. Just realizing that, okay, first of all, there's a real world out there, right? Whatever it is that you're trying to model is just simplified version of this real world. And that your model isn't going to get everything right. Like I noticed this thing where aspirants will come into a project or a problem that they're working on, might be personal or at work, and they just prescribe a set metric, that value for a metric that they hope to achieve. Like, oh, I want to get like 90% accuracy, 90%, whatever. And you got to understand that sometimes the data that you have doesn't support that type of predictive power, right? So just really understanding that there's a real world, there's your model, in between is the data, right? And if you don't have the good data, you can't build a model with much predictive power. I don't know if I went off a tangent or answered your question.
No. This is good. I think a lot of this is these are underrated things, right? But all the attention's on. I got this book staring at me in the face here. I'm using it kind of as a reference for the book I'm writing right now, just because of the style it's written in. My editor said it was awesome, and it's a great book, great book. But it's techniques, right? It kind of assumes that you've got a good thinking cap on and can figure out a lot of other things. So,
what book are you writing, man? I didn't know you're writing a book. Tell me about
shit. That's right. It's the fundamentals of data engineering.
Nice.
So it's going to be out in O'Reilly next year.
Damn, O'Reilly too, man. That's like the cream of the crop when it comes to like data science publications, man. That's huge.
Yeah, I'm honored, and Matt's helping me with it, and he's co-authoring it. And we're both stoked. I mean, this was I think a dream come true to write for a book publisher like that. So
that's awesome, dude. Congrats.
But I think what it also is forcing is like there is not a book on data engineering yet. So there's some self-published ones, but I mean, there's nothing that they've officially written yet, or published. So it's kind of like we've just been diving deep into all sorts of subject matter, reevaluating all of our assumptions, trying to understand like what, with a field that's changing so quickly, what are the immutables that won't change, right? What's a good way to think about problems, and how to approach them, and also how do you write in an engaging way? I mean, Aurelian did like a killer job with this book. And so our editor, I was his editor, and she's like, yeah, you should, read this, or at least get to know the writing style. I mean, this is like O'Reilly's #1 book.
Yeah.
Right? So she's like, just
cool,
write something fun. Like, because I think to the point of like learning data engineer, or not data, but data science, right? Like it needs to be fun as well. I look at a lot of these courses or papers and articles and so forth. Like these are like boring as hell. I guess you'll learn some tactical stuff, but I think it takes a lot of repetition to understand, and it takes a lot of like, I think, hard problem solving and losing a fair amount of time in the process to really grasp how to actually solve real world data science problems. Because as you point out, it's a lot of the non-machine learning stuff. You got to be able to like suss out a situation and figure it out. So
yeah. So real quick, I had this question that's kind of stuck in my mind as we're talking about data engineering. So like, data science, we study techniques obviously, but there's also like theories and theorems in data science, right, that govern a lot of how these algorithms work. I'm wondering, like, within data engineering, are there like theorems or postulates or anything within data engineering that you guys think about, or is it just strictly, kind of software engineering applied to a data domain?
I think there's several undercurrents with data engineering, and these aren't directly obvious either. But I don't know if there's theorems or postulates, because it's not really like or lemmas or whatever. It's not like math based. To a certain extent, probably is if you dig deep enough. But I think data management is a giant topic, encompasses data governance and security and all this stuff. I think that's one of the things that underpins data engineering and the data engineering life cycle. Software engineering principles for sure. Coding and testing and debugging and just software best practices. I think data architecture is another one, like knowing how to architect systems. I've been thinking a lot about this was something I stumbled on the other day. Like, okay, define architecture, define define software architecture, define data architecture. You actually realize that there are definitions. There's a lot of debate in terms of what architecture means in the technical realm still. I think I'm leaning towards some notion of trade-off analysis, like being able to evaluate a situation and come up with the best possible combination of things given the trade-offs you have to make from a cost perspective, from a technical perspective, and so forth. From a business perspective, there's a lot of other things that you have to think about besides just what's the tech stack I'm using, like how's it going to work with the rest of the business. And then there's data ops, so data operations, similar to DevOps, but applied to data. So, observing, monitoring, incident response, and all these things. So I think these are, as far as I can tell right now, the things that do underpin data engineering. And I would say there's some overlap with data science too. But we can talk about that later. Because what I sense is data science is actually evolving as a field as well, where I think the discussions maybe a few years ago was like, it's all about model building. How do I build a classifier for this, that, or that framework? But it seems like that's becoming more and more of a solved problem for a lot of use cases. And now it's how do you start productionizing this stuff? So,
yeah. And I mean, talk about things that are missing from data science bootcamp curriculums. Like, as a data scientist, you're the end user of data ultimately, right? Like, people might be using the output of your whatever model you're making, but as a consumer of data, there's stuff that happens further up the food chain that you should probably be aware of, and that's the data governance, data management, and engineering aspect stuff. So let's talk about that a little bit in a boot camp, right? And then like the operational part of it, just include a module where you talk about what is operations, like ML ops and data ops, and why is it important for you to not only version control your code, but also your data and your models and have documentation and things like that?
Right. And it's interesting, in your office hours that we hang out on, it's pretty cool. These types of questions are coming up. It seems like more and more. I don't know what your take is.
Yeah. No, I love it, man. I love the office hours they're cool because for a while it was just those simple questions like, how do I get into data science? How do those type of questions? But then just the type of questions that have been coming in have just evolved, and they get really deep into some philosophical aspects of being a data scientist or a data professional. And so having people like you that have been in the game for forever. I mean, I don't know how old you are. You look super young, but
I'm 44.
44, holy shit, man. You look young, man.
It's genetics. I'm the type of person that I'm sure when I'm at a certain point when I'm 80, it would be like 80 and like one day and you'll look like you're like 100 years old. But until then you look eternally like this ambiguously young. So
but like we'll get people like you in, Dave Langer in, just such, like, I don't know how you get that much experience in, like for you, a 20-year career. Like, it's crazy. Like to get that much exposure, that much experience, working on really fun, interesting problems, man.
I was talking with Matt about this today, actually, because we're talking about just reading about data and stuff. And I told him, look, it was kind of weird the other day. I was looking, there was some tweet that went around like show me your first Amazon purchase or something. And so I looked at that, and I'm not even shitting you. It was like a book on forecasting, a book on price analysis, and like product management or something. This is like 2004 or five.
Wow.
And
Nice.
like I'd always been reading this kind of stuff. I think since even the late '90s, just either math or data books, and like just how it is. Like, this is like I think all I've wanted to do. And so I told him, like, I don't think of this kind of stuff as work. It's just kind of how it is. I mean, you're the same way. You do a probability problem.
Mhm.
That's fucked up. Like,
Yeah, man. That's that specific knowledge, right? Where it feels like play to you, but it looks like work to everyone else.
yeah, like very like things that people just avoid at all costs. Like, why would you do that to yourself, right? But we're
Mhm.
people like us,
Yeah.
So it's just the compounding of knowledge over, and skills, I think, over years, and like that has a very high compound rate.
Yeah, man.
Can't be
Yeah.
underrated.
Oh, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Like even when I like, I mean, because I you read a shit ton, and I mean, I read a lot, especially because I interview so many authors on the podcast.
Yeah.
Um, but like when you're reading a book, do you have any attachment to the outcome of reading the book? Like here's something I've been thinking about. Right, people, we've been conditioned to go to school to read a book so that we can get tested on it. So then
Mhm.
we read a book with the attachment of having to take notes, having to make sure that we have some tangible evidence that this is a book that has been read, right?
Mhm.
Instead of just reading the book to get the idea and have it collide with the other ideas that you have in your head and maybe spark off something new for yourself to think about. So, like when you're reading a book, like, do you go in there and say, all right, I better fucking learn about this shit. Otherwise, it was a waste of time.
Not
Right.
really. I
Yeah.
just impulsively buy books,
Same here. Yeah.
yeah. And I just read them. Like my Kindle is always, I actually keep a Notion board of all the books that are in progress right now because otherwise I lose track.
Yeah.
And there's several going on at once. I mean, I'm probably finishing, one or one and a half, maybe two books a week, which is kind of
Mhm.
crazy. But I read really fast. But back to your question though, it's I normally don't actually. My reading interests are very broad, and but keep in mind these are not technical books. I said I said weekends just for technical reading. But right now I'm reading the autobiography of Michael Ovitz, the guy who started the
Nice.
creative, artist agency, and like that's fascinating. I have no expectation of the book. I just know that he seems like an awesome guy, who's probably a bit of an asshole as well, and but somehow became like the most powerful person in Hollywood,
Yeah.
going from the mailroom to like running Hollywood. Is like, that's a story that I don't really
What's his
care.
name again?
Michael Ovitz.
Michael Ovitz. I
Yeah,
look.
it's a fun read so far. It's really good.
Yeah.
And I just read books like that, and
Yeah.
so no expectation. I just finished was a $1 billion loser recently, and I thought that's a good example of just a book that was a book about WeWork and Adam
Ah.
Adam Newman and just how he got his start and managed to finagle his way into being, you know, WeWork guy. So I tend to read a lot of books like that. I think where there's like my favorite types of books are probably those types where it's somewhat biographical,
Yeah.
just because you learn a lot in the process, just like the thought process of these people and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How
Yeah.
about
It's important.
yourself? How do you how
Yeah.
do you read?
So like I make it a priority in life, man. Like I make it a huge priority in life. And on my desk here I've got bookshelves around the room, but on my desk I have my current reading bookshelf, and this is just
That's cool.
books throughout the week that I'll read. I make a point to read early in the morning, and then
Mm,
I've got books upstairs by my bedside that I'll read at night. But like you, my interests are varied, right? So I got a few books here, like I'm working through, like I said, How to Solve It,
right.
uh, and
It's a good one.
I've been thinking about. So I go through these like kind of periods of intellectual kind of curiosity, and the longest one I've had so far is just thinking about like creativity and
Mm.
what is creativity, how can I be more creative. So I've got a few books on that. Here's A Kick in the Seat of the Pants. So he also wrote
Oh,
A Whack
nice.
on the Side of the Head, Roger Van Eck. And so then he wrote this book, which was Expect the Unexpected, Roger Van Eck. And this is about, he took uh, it's a creativity tool based on the ancient wisdom of Heraclitus, right? So
Hmm.
Heraclitus, pre-Socratic philosopher. So I thought that stuff was interesting. So then I picked up, fragments, Heraclitus's fragments, right? And then I've also got Tiny Habits, right? Like I'm any given time, I'm usually reading books to solve a problem that I have, right?
Hmm.
So lately it's been a lot of philosophy, but lately a lot of Eastern philosophy, particularly, trying to it's I'm not having like an existential crisis or anything like that. Like that's not what I'm having, but it's just trying to really understand and tame like my mind, right? So a lot of
Hmm.
Eastern philosophy has been helpful for that. And Bruce Lee's Striking Thoughts, like fucking amazing,
That's a
man.
good book.
Yeah.
Another one you should check out from Bruce Lee is The Tao Jeet Kune Do.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The I remember so my uncle, I, I think I kind of take after my uncle in a sense. He's still alive, but he's really philosophical guy. He's really into martial arts, and he had a few different Bruce Lee books, and one of them was that one. And I remember
Hmm.
reading that when I was a kid, like 10 years old, and I was like, "Dude, this is so cool."
It's cool. The thing I like about that book is sorry, I'm setting the priority on my Wi-Fi so my kids don't interrupt it. Uh, I like that book because it was when I read it, it was the first time I came across like true interdisciplinary thinking.
Hmm. Hmm.
I can't remember who it was. Actually, a really famous rock climber who turned me onto it back in the day because he was kind of a Bruce Lee nerd. Um, but I started reading it. I was like, yeah, this is actually really interesting because it was the first time I think before martial arts, everything was very segmented, either a karate person or a taekwondo person or whatever, wrestler, jiu-jitsu. And Bruce Lee really threw up at the door on that and said, look, I mean, incorporate all the styles. And uh, that was cool. That was
Yeah,
eye-opening.
yeah.
So I mean, it's the first time I think in my life where I realized like, and it was an outside the box sort of thing. Like I'd always been somewhat, I guess, nonconformist, but this is really what threw the door open and said, yeah, I mean, you can come up with like really original ideas and approaches of stuff. There's nothing to stop you.
Yeah, I mean that's what creativity is. Creativity is just connecting things that look like on the surface they might not belong together, but that intersection when they come together uh, make something that's just far greater than those two things
Oh yeah.
separately, right?
One good book I think you would really like. Have you read Poor Charlie's Almanac?
Yeah, I've got that. Yeah, I bought it after you told me
Oh,
about it
okay.
in the
No
office
shit.
hours. Actually, yeah, I've got it. It's fucking massive, dude. Like that was the most expensive book I bought. It was like $100 something
It's
in
worth it.
Canadian dollars. Yeah, I've got it
Mm.
sitting. Like it's the way I've got my room set up. I've got bookshelves all over. This bookshelf has Poor Charlie's Almanac sitting right there, and he's like looking at me all day long.
It's
So I got to make a point to go through it. Actually,
yeah. Take off the dust cover on it. But it's one of those books where yeah, it's so expensive. It's like, do I dare read this thing? It's like yeah, I should probably read it. Yeah, but the reason I bring that up though is I think he's one of the people that's really recognized as being a voracious reader and so forth. Like he's the one who basically came up, I think, with the modern idea of mental models because like
yeah,
I think he was talking about it for a long time. Then Shane Parrish from
yeah,
Farnham
yeah,
Street, kind of picked it up. Then all of a sudden there's like a billion books of mental models, including Shane's. Um, but yeah, that I think that's my desert island book. If I were to pick one book, it'd be Port Charlie's Almanac out of any of
yeah.
them.
I'll
So
prioritize that over the summer, man. Definitely.
yeah,
I mean, it's been
it's
sitting here for about a month and a half or so. I just haven't got a chance to read it.
cool.
Like, do you do that? Do you just have books sitting around that you haven't read yet that you just have there just to remind you, like, motherfucker, you don't know it all. Like, relax. Like, you think
Mm-hmm.
you know it all. Look at all these books you've got left unread. There's still a lot of work to do. So I kind of do that to myself.
Yeah, I think the benefit of what you do, which what you buy physical books, is you have a visual reminder. Like I'll do both, but I skew more towards the Kindle. In which
Mm.
case, if it's on sale, I'll be like, sure, I'll get that because I'll totally read that someday.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's like thousands of books on there, and I'm not even exaggerating the number. And therefore, one hack I've picked up is I have a digital Kindle, and so uh, if it's a book that lends itself well to kind of an audio experience, I'll actually have the Kindle read that when I'm in the car or just like working
Mm.
around the house. So that's kind of a hack, but I do that for like specific types of books, like I said, that so history books that are very, your eyes might fall out if you try and read this stuff, but if you can
Mm.
listen to it, it makes it slightly easier to
Yeah.
digest. So I might mix that in once in a while if it's gnarly.
Yeah. So like audiobooks is a huge thing for me. I love Audible, like, the premium subscription tier. Audible, if you ever want to sponsor my podcast, do it, please. But the premium tier, you get access to a bunch of free books. If I read a book and I really like it, I'll buy the physical book, read it as well. But I try to make it an immersive experience, right? So if there's a book that I've really been enjoying, I'll also go and find talks by the author. I'll find explainer videos where people are digesting it just to get it from all different angles and just really put myself into that, the concepts of that book. It doesn't happen with every single book that I read, but only the ones that are really just grabbing a hold of my mind.
Which one happened to you like lately with that?
It's a good one. Most recently, it's been I'd say Nassim Taleb stuff.
Oh
A
shit.
lot of
Yeah.
his stuff. Yeah, his stuff has been amazing. And then he's got his book, The Statistical Consequences of Fat Tails, which is free on archive. If you look it up, it's called a
I'll have to go check
technical
that out.
sort of series.
The one I haven't read actually. That and his Vanilla Options book. I haven't read that either.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, this
that's
one just
cool.
came out, and he's got a MOOC on YouTube, and they're super low budget, but they're really
Oh
awesome.
shit. I'm gonna make a note right now.
Yeah, it's N Taleb's MOOC series, and just a bunch of just probability theory and short videos where he's just telling us why we're thinking about probability theory wrong. It's interesting, we were talking about programming languages earlier, and he does like he'll run some simulations on the MOOC, and like they're 10-minute MOOCs, so he'll share his screen or whatever. And I was looking at the file that the file name is whatever dot NB, and I was like, what language is he programming it in? It's a .nb file extension. I have no clue what that is, and it was like Wolfram or something like that, like some programming language, like Wolfram Alpha programming language. It was interesting.
Huh. That is interesting. Nassim's one of those people that I would place his books up there with the other Desert Island books.
Yeah,
When I read Fooled by Randomness when it came out, that changed a lot.
yeah.
So
That should be included in grad school curriculums, right?
mm-hmm.
Like I feel like everything I was taught, like I got a grad degree in statistics. I feel like everything that I was taught was just useless. I mean, speaking of grad school, man, do you feel like you've learned more outside of school than you have in school?
It's a weird thing. So, I mean, definitely for sure, but I never went to grad school, for example. I have a bachelor's in math, and I can't say I was like the best student around. Like I'm bright, but I also partied a lot and
Yeah,
worked as a DJ at night and stuff. So yeah, I mean,
nice.
like a pro DJ. So, but I think that I learned a lot. I think mathematics had a really good foundation for learning how to think, learning how to deconstruct problems, learning how to analyze problems. I think that was, as I told, my professor in the exit interview, I just like, if there's one thing I learned, I think it was just how to think clearly. I don't know that I'll really ever use, PDQs, for example, or any of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I think I came away with a good foundation of, to at least get a job where I was using a lot of my math in my first job, which was a analyst. But I think I learned more probably just being in the, like I've always straddled data and business as well. So as a kind of person who could translate a lot of, hard technical things to business users and vice versa, for whatever reason, I just have that skill set. So I'm equally comfortable. My first job was actually working with the CEO, being his direct report,
Nice.
for anything analytical related and forecast related, and any optimizations he wanted to, anything you want modeled, I would do it. So
Nice.
that was an early job, I say, where it kind of set the tone, because I had to really learn to translate things to, business people and vice versa. So yeah, I mean, I would say it's just also the habit of like lifelong learning. That's probably the more important thing. But now I teach as well. I teach school, so it's now the table's turned again. And so I try and take what I learned from my experience as a student. I think the experience I've seen of other students when they join the workforce, I try and make my material as like relevant and useful to them as possible. So when they get a job, that they don't just know the tactical stuff, but they kind of understand the reasons why, and like strategically, like, why would you make this decision?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That why part is super important. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing like I'd like to see more MOOCs. I was actually contemplating this idea of writing a book, right? I think I might have uh, brought it up in like an office hour or something, right? Like the forest for the trees, right? And it would be a book just about the random forest, but it would be applications of random forest in different industries. And I would do one chapter that is on fintech, and I would call that chapter "Money Grows on Trees."
Mm-hmm. I think this is a
But
great idea, and honestly, you should do this.
yeah,
So,
definitely.
or
It's
at
on
least make
the
it a video
agenda.
series or something, right?
Yeah,
But like this,
exactly.
it's these applications of these, because so you know, to harken back to when we were talking about machine learning models, and it's like the first thing a new data scientist grabs, right? Because it's a toolbox. You know, you want to start using tools. Right? I didn't come here to learn the philosophy of like hammers and shit. I just wanted to use hammers. Like that's how it is. But you know, learn to be a craftsman. That kind of entails you're going to be learning from other people about how do I use my hammer in this situation, right? That's I think it's spot on. I don't see anyone doing this kind of stuff, frankly, because
Yeah,
it all sort of assumes every problem's the same, actually. So
yeah, yeah. Like I mean, there's books like I bought a book that's on my summer reading list. It's The Theory That Wouldn't Die, and it's an entire book about Bayes' theorem, right? And then there's another book like Nate Silver's Signal and Noise, which is all just about predictive models and things like that.
mhm.
Then there's Shape, which is all just about geometry. And it's like, okay, cool. These are this theme is interesting, where you can pick a particular thing and just explore it in depth and see how it's used in a number of different places. And I mean, maybe connect the dots, right? I mean, that's the most important thing. I mean, we started this last few minutes off talking about reading and stuff, but it's just all about connecting dots, man. It's all about
It
just
is.
linking whatever it is that you have input to something else that you already know, so that now you've got a broader range of understanding.
Yeah, I mean that's what Munger talks about too. I mean that's why he says there's 90 something mental models that you need to know to be a successful human. So I think the basics of chemistry, physics, human psychology, behavioral economics, and Lord knows what else he's written down. But
Yeah,
his whole point is, I think, what you're saying, right? He calls it the Lollapalooza effect, where after a bit you have so many interconnected ideas. This is where creativity really starts taking form. Like you're able
yeah,
to disconnect seemingly, unrelated ideas and figure things out in ways that just you're uniquely capable of figuring out. There's not anyone else who's doing that, and
yeah,
that's cool.
yeah, man. I mean, no one can compete with you on being you, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
you become you by just giving yourself exposure to a bunch of different shit,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if all you do is just read one genre of book,
Romance novels, yeah,
right? Romance novels. Let's say all you do is just read books on machine learning. That's it. Let's say all you
yeah.
listen
That's
to a
all
data
you.
science podcast, right?
Uh-huh.
Like that really, really limits your worldview, and it I think stunts the development of your creativity.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also, reading it and then doing stuff too, right? Like I like to think that I've
yeah,
had several acts in life, and you probably have too, right? Like I used
yeah,
to be a DJ, used to climb, used to be sponsored at that, and like did a bunch of other shit. And all these experiences, they seem tangential and they have a way of weaving themselves together too. I used to say connecting the dots.
yeah,
And just putting yourself in interesting situations, stuff that may not make any sense, something that may be very uncomfortable. That to me is where you start learning a lot.
oh
So
yeah. I love that feeling. I love feeling stupid. It's a great feeling.
mhm. It's
Well, what's
awesome.
better? I mean, because nothing ever interesting started by knowing, right? It always has to start with some type of unknown, right? Imagine if they
Mhm.
gave the movie with the end first. Like that would just that you already know how it's going to end. There's nothing interesting that can come when you come from a mindset of yeah, I already know what's going to happen. I already know what's going on. I have to maintain that curiosity.
That's interesting. I don't know about your take on this. Like, the one thing that always bugs me is when people say, "Oh yeah, like that's not surprising," or I'm not surprised, or yeah, I mean that's obvious. For some reason, that irks me quite a bit. I don't know what your take is on that, but
Yeah.
there's certain people that just say this like all the time, like that's basically their only response. So
So I was thinking there's something I've been thinking about today. A theme. What I've been thinking about is that, and just to give context, like I'll read a bit of philosophy and I'll reflect on that, and then sometimes what I read is it just bleeds its way into the rest of the day. And this morning, I happened to read this. I was reading Striking Thoughts, and Bruce Lee had this quote in there about what is versus should, right? And essentially, he's saying that. I'm gonna try to find the quote for you here real quick. I've got it here. But is versus should. What is and what should be, right? So what is more important than what should be. Too many people are looking at what is from a position of thinking what should be, right? And so I found that interesting because when you look at something from a what should be, you're filtering it through your ego. You're filtering it through your own perception and trying to force something to align with the way that you think it should be, right? That should word, instead of just accepting it for what it really is. So connecting that back to what you're saying, when people are like, oh, well, I saw that coming. Well, I mean, okay, what does that mean? Does that mean that now reality is just conforming to whatever you think it should go? Like, I don't know. I lost my train of thought there, but I found a connection there that maybe I'll do back to that.
yeah, no, I mean, to me, it seems like there's almost like this jaded sense that yeah, I got like the world figured out and shit. Don't need to
Yeah.
bother like pushing myself, or you're kind of the opposite person. I wouldn't say opposite, but similar, where like like right now, this is like in the economy is having inflation, right? So everyone like freaking out about that and saying, well, yeah, so I mean, obviously, we're gonna, finally have hyperinflation and shit, right? But these are the same people who have been saying this stuff since like 2007, and 2008. Who's that guy, Peter Schiff? He comes to mind as like one of them, like this like raging gold bug who's like, yeah, the economy is going to collapse any day now, and he's been saying that for like, decades. So
Yeah. See, I told you, but oh, man, you were wrong for like the last 25 years. Like,
yeah, he predicted like 9 of the last 2 recessions. So it's fucking crazy, but and that's I think you and I kind of probably look at that style of thinking and just I guess we're the opposite. I guess we're not so rigid that we're
yeah,
going to do
it's
that.
limiting, right? It's really limiting when you go into a situation thinking or just presuming or knowing that it's all going to go right. There's like, I was reading this aphorism by Aaron Haspel, I think, and he said something to the effect of philosophy begins with just forgetting what you think you know, right? So yeah, just forget what you think you know and just take it for what it is. Take the inputs that you see, and then go from there, man.
Yeah, but you need to get 90% accuracy in your model, right? So
Yeah,
it's like that's
it
interesting.
should. This should. My model should have 90% accuracy. Well, what are you talking about, man? Like, look at the real world.
Uh-huh.
Look how complex this thing is that you're trying to model. Then you have the arrogance to come in and say that my little Python model can accurately describe reality to 90%.
Yeah. It cracks me up on LinkedIn. We see these posts once in a while, like, yeah, I can like predict it, I can teach you to predict the stock market in Python, for example. Like,
Yeah,
get the fuck out of here.
yeah,
Because it's dangerous too. I mean, it'd be one thing if I was teaching you how to like predict baseball scores or something, right? But like, now you're going to be betting your money on this thing, and that it's caveat emptor, but
yeah, man.
it's nuts. Interesting. Talking about your podcast or the artist and data scientist, like, what got you started in that? And I guess how did you go about finding all your guests? You've had quite a few heavy hitters on there.
Yeah, man. It's been crazy. Yeah, so I've been doing this since I started recording episodes in like February 2018. And so I was just sitting on a beach in Florida, and I was thinking, I was like, I want to do something, right? My wife and I were on a baby moon. So she was very pregnant at the time.
Nice.
This is right before we had our baby, right before the world went crazy. And I just remember thinking like, okay, I'm doing this data science dream job thing, which is awesome. I'm enjoying it, but I want to do something more, right? And I want to do something uncomfortable, right? I want to do something that I can look back on it and say, wow, that made me something different. It made me something else. Um, and at that time, I was like really inspired by a few podcasts I was listening to. There was Tom Billy's podcast, Impact Theory, Jay Shetty's podcast, and then James Altucher. So I was
Yeah,
listening to these guys' podcasts, and I was like, "Oh man, this is such a cool medium!" Like, and I never really listened to podcasts before that. Believe it or not, like I listened to
interesting.
lectures and talks on YouTube. Like I would listen to just like like talks and TED talks and things like that. But I never listened to podcasts,
Hmm.
until 2018, and I just was raptured by the medium. And I was like, "All right, let's do this." Um, and decided to do it, but I didn't know what it was going to look like, right? Like I did it and I was like, oh, well, I'll do like a monologue, then I'll do a interview, and then I'll do like, guest questions or whatever. So then eventually it was like, all right, I'll just do interviews. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of how it just, and a seed was planted in my mind that just blossomed and took over until it was the only thing I can think about doing. And then I finally just did it.
It's
Um,
rad.
and, and then reaching out to guests, man, I just like, what's the worst that could happen, right? I can email someone and they're either not going to respond or they're going to say no, which is exactly what would happen if I didn't reach out to them anyways, right? They're
Hmm.
either right, so there's no downside to it. Um,
What was
and
the
so
most
just
who was the most surprising guest that you ended up getting on your show?
uh, James Altucher, I'd say. James Altucher was crazy. To me, that was insane. Robert Greene was too. Like I didn't think that
Yeah,
would happen. So Robert Greene and James Altucher. But just because James Altucher, like he always talks about how he never responds to emails, right? Like that's his thing. Like I just don't respond to people's emails. People send me emails. Like he talks about this on his podcast, his books and shit. And then he responded to mine. So I sent him emails. Sent him 10 ideas a day for 10 days. Because that's his thing, right? Coming up with 10 ideas a day. So I sent him an email, 10 ideas for things that we could talk about if you ever come on my podcast. And then like 2 hours later, he was like, all these sound great. Let's do it.
that's cool.
And, yeah. And I had him on the podcast. Yeah. I mean, but, and, since then I've had a bunch of cool people, man. Like I will go through every book I have on my shelf and I'll find some way to find the author's email address or find their website or get in touch with them, and just bring them on the show, right? So, you know, not only James Altucher, but there's been Robert Greene, Annie Duke,
Mm,
Scott Young, who wrote Ultra Learning, Barbara Oakley, um, Tiffany Shlain. She's kind of a big deal. She's the woman who created the Webby
mm.
Awards. Um, yeah, it's
Some
a
big
bunch of people,
names.
man. Yeah, it's been cool, man. It's been interesting experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. Hey, what's next for the show?
Just continue. Like, I mean, continue doing interviews for sure. Like, I started doing the happy hours and the office hours, as a way to keep that data science element as part of the show while I can, still call myself a data science podcast and explore other weird topics. Because, I talk to a lot of philosophers and stuff on the show as well. But what's next is, man, I'm just gonna keep on trying to just up the caliber of guests that I get. Um, Not necessarily, don't really care about big names or anything like
You
that. I
having
just
like
want
Oprah on or something?
to, yeah.
That'd be dope if
Hey,
you did, but
one day, man, one day she might come. My nickname growing up was Harpo, which is Oprah backwards. So, but I use my interviews as a way for me, as a way to forcibly make myself think about things that I probably wouldn't have thought about
mm,
otherwise. Right. So if I see like an interesting idea, interesting topic, and I'll trace it back to the author, and I'm like, all right, cool, let's get this person on the show and let's talk to them about this. And I kind of just use the podcast as a way for me just to explore and expand my knowledge.
that's really cool. I do the same thing with this show too. I mean, part of it's to talk to awesome, smart people in the field, and I think also it's as much just to I think sharpen my thinking on certain things as well.
Yeah.
There's no real there's no ulterior motive or anything. It's not like I have like my list of questions like, oh, I really need to get to the bottom of like this thing here. Let's try and squeeze that in, but it's more just organically these things come up in conversation,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yeah.
like especially, writing this book, it's like I'm trying to dig underneath the superficial stuff, right? Like kind of if you're thinking about data science as not just a set of machine learning models, but really dive deep and think, okay, so like what are the actual design patterns here for data science?
Yeah.
It's tricky. There's a lot of layers to this kind of stuff, and the only way you're going to find it is through like reading and then talking to people and writing out your own thoughts. So I mean, that's really cool. You're doing that with the show, because I'm sure it helps evolve your thinking a lot
Yeah.
into places that you probably didn't think you would go.
Oh
So
yeah, definitely. And I mean, I will say that there is some uh, maliciousness to my guessing questions, because it's typically going to be problems that I'm dealing with at work, or sometimes. I mean, it'll be that, right? Like I'll reach out to, like, if I'm dealing with some personal issue, like for example, I was burnt the fuck out. Beginning of the year, I was so burnt out, so I started reaching out to a few people who are burnout experts and talking to them. I was
cool.
going through, like, how do I, work issues, like how to become a better person at work, right? So I'd find authors that talk about that. I didn't know shit about data management, so I was like, all right, well, I've got these books here, let me see if these authors want to talk to me. So I had, Irna Steenbeek, George Farrakhan, Scott Taylor come on the show, and I asked them questions. So I do kind of let my own problems that I'm going with drive some of the guests that I bring, while simultaneously, just forcing myself to think about new, interesting stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Did you utilize Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power or something for your job stuff? Just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. I try to implement, like, his books are awesome, man. Like,
They really are. I don't know
really,
how
really
he
good.
writes this stuff. They're big and they're dense
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're thoughtful.
His writing process is crazy, man. Like, the way he talks about it when he's writing a book, it's just like, he says that it almost kills him when he writes a book. It's just so much. He just puts so much into it. And you can tell, man. And if we all do just a little bit of that, just like put ourselves into what we do, right? I try to do that with the podcast, and I hope that it shows with those interviews, that I really, like, I pour myself into the research, into the work, and just that toil that you go through to try to make something interesting, right?
Right.
Like, Robert Greene's writing words in a combination and in a sequence that have never been written before, right? And then the challenge for me as a podcaster is, how do I talk to this guest but still ask this guest questions that they haven't been asked before,
Mm.
and try to speak something into existence that did not exist before, right? Which is, it's crazy when you think about it, right? You and I sitting here having this conversation, talk about things like the sequence of these words, the combinations of these ideas and thoughts from, an hour ago to now. Like, nobody else has done this before,
Mm-hmm.
right? In the sense of the things that we talk about. And to me, that's just fascinating, and just trying to make that happen with every episode.
That's rad. Yeah, it's really inspiring to see what you're doing with that. So, I mean, I know it motivates me to, keep pushing, whatever I'm doing from a, interview and content angle, just because I think it's a nice thing I like about content too. It's not like a zero sum game or something, right? Where
Yeah,
it's like, just because you did this interview, it doesn't mean like,
yeah,
and just because you have these thoughts doesn't mean that other people can't have, same or different ones. And that's, I'm really liking this, because I come from the world of consulting, right? And that's like very much a zero sum game, where for the most
yeah,
part, like it's either you or the next person, and it's dog eat dog. And I do like this content world, where you can just talk to people, even people in the same niche, right? Like I'm talking to other data engineering content creators, and it's awesome. Like we all
mhm,
get along really well. We all talk all the time and get on each other's shows and collaborate. I think that's really cool. And the same thing with the office hours, right? Like you're doing data science content, and you got, you know, Dave, Tom, Vin, Greg, like kind of a who's who of like data science content creators coming on. Shri shows
mhm.
up
Yep,
and a
yep.
bunch of people, and it's rad.
Yeah, man. I'm all about positive sum games, man. Long term games with long term people. You're talking about the power of compounding. All the benefits in life come from compound interest, right? And compound interest isn't just money growing in your bank account, it is goodwill, it is relationships,
Mm-hmm.
it is networking, right? So, I mean, all the benefits come from compound interest, right? So, you have to play these long term games with long term people, and you have to play these positive sum games. And if somebody's sitting out there thinking about competition, well, you're too busy not being yourself if you're worried about competition, right? That's why part of my LinkedIn tagline is I escape competition through authenticity, because
Mhm.
nobody can compete with me on being me, right? So as long as I just remember that, keep myself grounded with that, then yeah, I'm gonna hook everybody up that I can, man, in any way possible, right? Like there's no reason not to.
There's no reason not to. That's right, man. Well, I think it's a good place to wrap up for
Yeah, man.
now, but man, we'll have to talk again. I feel like, we could talk for hours.
Yeah,
So
man. Hey, I'm excited to, we'll get you back on. You and Matt together would be awesome when you guys get that book.
yeah,
Or if we want to talk about data engineering at some point, you're always welcome on the Arts of Data Science, man.
well, the
But
book's not
yeah,
out until August of next year. So
okay. Hey, well,
long
I
game, I
mean,
guess.
yeah, I mean, given that most of my episodes don't get released for 7 months afterwards, we got
Yeah, well,
time.
that's cool.
Yeah. Um,
Nice.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I hope to see you again in office hours, maybe even this Friday, man.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Love what you're doing there. So, I feel like it's a good community and it's become a habit of some sort to
Yeah.
show up. So yeah, I'm glad you're doing that though. It's a great service to the community and thank you. So
Oh, thank you, man. Appreciate
cool.
that.
All right, bud. We'll talk to you
All right, man.
later. I see you,
Later.
Humphrey. Bye bye.